We're going to continue our Civil War studies by looking at some of the early causes of the Civil War. And this goes way, way back, so let's go way back and look at how the country started to divide in two in this kind of era of sectionalism. So going back to 1820, the Missouri Compromise. The Louisiana Purchase added all this new territory. All of a sudden, thanks to Haiti and Thomas Jefferson, our country is doubled in size. And so as we start to take up that space, we carve out territories and those become new states. The fear was that there would be more slave states or more free states, and that one side would dominate and try to change the laws. And so anytime we added new states, we wanted to come up with a compromise to keep that balance between free states and slave states to kind of avoid the fight. And so Congress and America, we just kind of kept kicking the can down the road. We didn't want to face this fight, and so we just kind of kept avoiding it and compromising for decades until finally we came to the war. And so there's this constant fight to maintain that balance of free states and slave states so that nobody has too much power. By 1820, North and South each have 11 states. By around that time, Missouri had reached the required population to now become a state. For a while, they're a territory. Enough people move in. Once they get enough, they can apply to Congress to become a state. And Missouri is kind of this tricky situation, and they are a Midwestern state. They've got good enough weather to have plantations, but they're also in the north. And so it's a northern state, but it's got the soil for farming. And so the question is, well, can we have slavery in the north again? And the House slowed plans of Missouri becoming a state by passing the Talmadge Amendment. And it's the House kind of sticking it to the South, saying, okay, if Missouri comes in, no more slaves are allowed to be brought into Missouri. Any newborn children born to slave parents already there are automatically free. And so it's the North kind of saying this should be a free state. And the South defeats this. This was just a proposal. But we can already see this kind of fight brewing as far as what kind of state is Missouri going to be. What's going to happen as we add new states. And so Henry Clay was kind of our great congressman, and he comes up with a compromise. He comes up with a deal. And this is known as the Compromise of 1820, that'll keep this balance and will kind of avoid the fight for another decade. And so we're going to add two states. Missouri is going to come in as a slave state, but we're going to cut off a chunk of Massachusetts, and that will become Maine. It had enough people, and this kind of keeps this compromise. And so we add two states, so now it's 12 versus 12. We keep this tie vote. Plus, the other part of the deal is we're going to draw a line dividing the Louisiana Territory, saying that anything below the line will be slavery only. Anything above the line is free territory. And so this way we're going to avoid this fight for a few more years. And so you'll notice it's giving a lot of land to the north, but it's also not the best farmland for a lot of the crops for slavery, but it opens up slavery for this kind of territory here. This does not include this territory here because that was still Spanish territory. We are going to get there, well, soon. Another big issue kind of showing this brewing division and this fight is called the Nullification Crisis. It's this early fight between North and South. Also this fight between states versus the federal government. Can a state reject a federal law if it doesn't like it? And so here's what went down around the same time. The UK was getting really good at making factories. They had their Industrial Revolution. And their factories were so good that they could sell cloth, textiles, clothing really cheap to the United States because they were using machine labor. And so they kept selling all these textiles to the Americans, and the Americans were a little annoyed because what about the American factories? What about the American clothing makers? And so the U.S. would tax these goods. They'd throw tariffs on these goods, saying, okay, you're selling your shirts way, way too cheap. This is hurting American business, so we're going to tax British shirts to help the American shirt manufacturers. And so this way, this will help northern businesses. There's northern factories making clothing for Americans. We're going to tax the British stuff so that people buy American. And so we tax these UK goods, and it hurts the UK businesses. So the UK says, fine, okay, if we're not going to sell that much clothing, we don't need to buy that much cotton from the Americans. And so they reduce the amount of cotton they're buying because they're not selling as many clothes in America. And so by taxing England, we are hurting the South. And so the South's going to get a little annoyed, and that this tariff, it's really only helping northern businesses, northern factories. In the end, it just hurts the South, it hurts the UK, and so the South is a little annoyed by this tax. Vice President John C. Calhoun, with his wild, wild hair, is a little annoyed by this, saying, hey, this is hurting one half the country, helping another half the country. This is not good for all Americans. So he calls this the tariff of abominations and goes crazy about it. And he comes up with this theory, the Nullification Theory. And the idea here is it questions the legality of national laws in the states. Can Washington, D.C. pass a law on a state? Because the entire U.S. Constitution is based on the consent of the states. If a state wants to stay, they'll stay. If a state wants to follow those laws, they'll follow those laws. So it's the idea that states can reject laws that they consider unconstitutional. If it doesn't follow the rules of the Constitution, states can just say, nope, not going to do it. Plus, to make things even scarier, if a state does not like what's happening in its country, it can just say, I don't want to be part of this country anymore, and leave. And so if nullification is denied, if they don't get to kind of do what they want, they can just leave and form their own country. And that's kind of the idea. And this can lead to secession, where any state can just leave whenever they want. The president, and so it's this fight between the president and the vice president, and the president says, no, nobody gets to leave. The union must be preserved. And so he's kind of a hard man. And so the vice president resigns in protest. South Carolina, which is one of the more rebellious states, threatens to secede, saying, okay, if we can't leave the union, we're just going to do it anyways. And we'll fight you if you need to. Congress says, yes, we will fight you if you want to leave. If you attempt to secede and break off, we will invade you, we will destroy you, and we will drag you back into this country. And so South Carolina says, yeah, we're probably not ready for a war against the entire United States. And they don't really get support from the other southern states, especially considering Andrew Jackson is a southerner. He was a slave owner. And so he's, again, pushing the idea that union is more important than these states' rights. And so they come up with a deal, they compromise, they lower the tax over 10 years. That increases British consumption of southern cotton and kind of calms everybody down. So this is this time where we almost see the Civil War start. We almost see states splitting off over this fight of federal rule over the states. And in the end, Jackson's able to hold us together and, again, avoid that fight for another day. And we'll stop there.